Hi, everybody. I've decided to go outside since it's such a gorgeous day, and I'm going to teach world history from out here. The camera may wobble a little bit. That's because it is a little breezy here at Spring Point in South Portland. There's the lighthouse over there. There's Fort Gorges in the middle of Portland Harbor right there. And here, you didn't think I was going to be without today, did you? Here is the cup of tea that we all need, so I hope you're settling up with one. Time for me to have a sip. Okay, today we're going to learn about French history. We're going to learn about the age of Huguenots and religious wars in French history. Boy, that camera sure is bobbling. All right, we're going to try to do our best here. Get to the right section. Nailed it. Okay. Chapter 21, Section 2. France in the 1500s and 1600s. So what was happening in France? In 1559, the French king died, having had several sons. His widow was an Italian princess from Florence named Catherine de Medici. And Catherine ruled the country because all of her sons were too young to do it themselves. She figured she was a brilliant and skilled politician. She tried to keep the country together in the face of a lot of conflict, especially since there were Protestants now. Huguenots, the French Calvinists. She tried to give France stability, but there was conflict between the Catholics and the Huguenots, and that caused a lot of tension, and that boiled over in the year 1572. See, Catherine thought that she would make a compromise between the two sides, that she would actually have her daughter, Margot, married off to one of the most important Huguenot princes anywhere near France, this tiny little area right between France and Spain called Navarre. So Catherine de Medici married her daughter Margot off to Prince Henry of Navarre. But the thing was that Henry had an uncle who was really, really important in French politics. He was Admiral Coligny. And Admiral Coligny was the head of the French Navy and a top advisor to Catherine de Medici's son, Charles. So she was jealous of the fact that Admiral Coligny had become kind of a father figure to her own son, a son that she wanted to dominate. She wanted to control French politics. And so she wasn't too happy with Admiral Coligny having that much control as a father figure to her own son. So she arranged this wedding of Admiral Coligny's nephew. But the thing was that Coligny was also at the same time advising the king that he needed to go to war against Spain because Spain was endangering France's national security. But Catherine de Medici thought the real reason that Coligny wanted a war against Spain was because the Spanish were Catholic and they were hurting Protestants all around Europe. And of course, Admiral Coligny and his nephew were Protestant. They were Huguenots. So, she wasn't too happy with Admiral Coligny and the power that he had with her own son. The wedding happened on St. Bartholomew's Day. And after the wedding, something weird happened. Somebody tried to kill Admiral Coligny. There was an assassination attempt. And the thing was, the assassin failed, but he did shoot him. And he dropped the pistol. The pistol could be traced back to Catherine de Medici. So everybody knew that Catherine de Medici had tried to murder Admiral Coligny right there on the same day as the wedding of Admiral Coligny's nephew and her own daughter. So the Protestants were pretty angry about this. Catherine de Medici went to her son Charles and said, look, you know what I've done. And I did it because France needs Admiral Coligny out of the way. And now the Protestants are going to rise up and kill us all. You need to follow my instructions here and now. Her son Charles followed the instructions. Unfortunately, the instructions were to send the army house to house all around Paris and find out everywhere the Protestants lived. All the hotels, all the inns where Protestants had come for the wedding, of their own hero, Henry of Navarre, to the Queen's daughter. When they found all those places, they painted the doors to all those places with a white cross. And then, the very next morning, at 2 a.m., the church bells rang. And that was the sign for the army to go back, house to house, and slaughter everyone inside every one of those locations. Tens of thousands of Protestants were killed, but it became worse than that. This is called the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. It got much worse than that, because anybody in Paris who hated somebody else went to the police and said, oh, that person over there, they're a Protestant. Even if they weren't, even if they were a practicing Catholic. People were rounded up and murdered in large numbers. It was a purge that went out of control. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre lasted for 3 days. When it was all over, it's said that the River Seine was so thick with people that you didn't actually have to swim to cross the river. You could walk across just on the dead bodies. Anyway, Henry of Navarre, even though he had been a Protestant, was spared being slaughtered in this massacre because in order to marry the king's daughter, he agreed to change and become a Catholic. Shortly after the wedding, he found an excuse to get away from Paris and get away from the king and Catherine de Medici, and he went home again to Navarre, between France and Spain, and he converted back to being Protestant. He then led a civil war in France against the Catholic royal family. But this civil war got even crazier, because in addition to being Henry of Navarre versus the king, there was a third side that jumped in this civil war, and that third side was pro-Catholic. Some people in France thought that the king wasn't doing enough to stop the Protestants, even though he was in a civil war with them. And so what happened was one of the king's own cousins, Henry, the Duke of Guise, G-U-I-S-E, Henry the Duke of Guise received money and support from the super hardcore Catholic king of Spain, Philip II, to start a third side in the French Civil War. Interestingly enough, by this point, King Charles had died, and his younger brother took the throne of France. His younger brother was Henry. So we have the War of the Three Henrys. There's King Henry in the middle. There's the ultra-hardcore Spanish pro-Catholic Henry, the Duke of Guise. And there is the Protestant Huguenot, Henry, the Prince of Navarre. So, it gets really crazy. Towards the end of this nasty three-way civil war, Henry, the king, was assassinated by Henry, the Duke of Guise's assassins. And then, Henry, the Duke of Guise, was assassinated, and there was only one Henry left. The War of the Three Henrys was over, and the only one surviving was the Protestant one, Henry, the Prince of Navarre. He went to Paris, he declared himself the winner, but he knew he couldn't rule France and remain a Protestant. And so Henry of Navarre became King Henry IV of France by actually taking the oath to become Catholic again. So this is the second time in his life that he switched from being a Protestant, a Huguenot, to a Catholic. Henry IV, the King of France. Now, in our country today, we have great presidents, right? You could look back on some of the greatest presidents in American history and think George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, maybe, even Ronald Reagan, perhaps. In France, they only think there was one great king. When the French Revolution happened and the people got rid of the monarchy, they destroyed all of the statues of all of their kings, except for one. One king was allowed to remain in statue form, and that was King Henry IV, because he is so beloved as a father figure in French history, a figure for tolerance, and a figure for prosperity and power, but power well used, power used for the benefit of the common person. Henry IV was a great king. He encouraged religious toleration so that Protestants, Huguenots, like he used to be, would be given civil rights, equal rights, the right to worship, the right to protect themselves. And he signed this into law. The Huguenots got these rights in what's called the Edict of Nantes, Nantes, the Edict of Nantes, which was the French city where they signed the Declaration. He made sure that France didn't go to war against any foreign powers for quite some time in order to provide financial stability for his people. However, he was assassinated in 1610. His son was Louis XIII. Louis XIII was too young to take control of the country, and so a cardinal was appointed to run the nation while he was too young, a regent, in order to take charge. And this man was Cardinal Richelieu, Richelieu. And Cardinal Richelieu is famous for being a character in lots of stories. For example, if you've ever heard of the Three Musketeers, actually the bad guy in the story is Cardinal Richelieu, running the shadow government and trying to stop these musketeers from helping the king. Not exactly how it really happened, but anyway. Richelieu was a bad guy in some people's eyes. Cardinal Richelieu, he wanted to ensure that the king had power, that the central authority of the monarch was well established. And so he took away some of the rights that the Protestants had gotten in the Edict of Nantes. He took away some of the rights of the nobles in other parts of the country so that they had to respect the king and give in to the king's demands. The nobles had to give up power. He also focused on limiting the power of France's biggest enemy, the Holy Roman Emperors. The Holy Roman Emperors at this point were all in one family. They were a dynasty now, the same dynasty that had ruled Spain. Remember, Emperor Charles was emperor of the Spanish Empire, but also the Holy Roman Empire. Well, he started the Habsburg dynasty. So this Habsburg dynasty was still in control in the Holy Roman Empire and in Spain. And they were France's worst enemy. So Cardinal Richelieu wanted to limit the power of the Habsburg family. He even though he was a Catholic cardinal ruling a Catholic country, he sided with the Protestants several times in order to try to stop the Holy Roman Emperor from getting more power in European politics. This was a real golden age in French art and literature, especially the idea of skepticism, that you need to be doubtful of things until you can prove them. A big supporter of this was Rene Descartes. I've skipped a couple of blanks here on purpose, but Rene Descartes. You may have heard of Descartes' idea that you can't actually know that anything exists until you can logically prove it. Descartes' famous saying is, "I think, therefore I exist." This is actually part of the idea that you can't even be sure of your own existence until you can prove your own existence. And that's where you need to start with this skepticism. Doubt yourself and your own existence. And only if you can say, "I think, therefore I do really exist," can you actually start being skeptical about things outside of yourself, too. So, Rene Descartes. But in addition to that, there were great writers at this time, like Michel de Montaigne. Michel de Montaigne invented what every middle school and high school student hates more than anything else, the essay. Michel de Montaigne started the essay format of writing. At the age of 4, young Prince Louis XIII's grandson, became king. His dad had already died, and now his grandfather Louis XIII died, and so Louis XIV became king at the age of 4. Now, the nobles weren't happy having lost their power to Cardinal Richelieu, and now Richelieu was gone, and so was Louis XIII. Once Louis XIII was old enough to take control of the country, they're gone, and the person in charge of the country now is a 4-year-old kid. So this was the perfect time for the nobles to rise up and take back the country. They tried to do that in a rebellion called the Fronde. The Fronde lasted several years, but ultimately it was unsuccessful. What it did do was teach young Louis XIV, the new king, the 4-year-old, now he's like 8 years old once the Fronde is crushed. It teaches young Louis never to trust the nobles, never to give them any power, any real control, because they will rebel against you. So Louis XIV grew up with an advisor, again, a Catholic cardinal chosen to run the country on his behalf, a man named Cardinal Mazarin, Mazarin. With Cardinal Mazarin's help, Louis XIV crushed the power of the nobles, kept them from ever really taking any control over France again. When Louis grew up, he kicked the nobles off of the government team. No longer did he have advisors who were nobles. He replaced them with middle-class people who would owe 100% of their loyalty to the king. People that he made, people that he put into positions of power. These people were called intendants, Intendants. So Louis XIV ran the country with the benefit of intendants who were loyal only to him. He also helped the French economy by putting it under control of a very wise economic advisor named Colbert, Colbert. Colbert ran it like a mercantilist. You might remember mercantilism from a few episodes ago. Mercantilism is where a country is only as rich as the amount of gold and silver that it can save up. In order to do that, you need to sell more stuff to other countries than you buy from them, because they will want you to pay them in gold if you buy from them. You instead should have colonies, and these colonies can provide you with the resources you need, and then you sell stuff back to the colonies in exchange for gold. So mercantilism was a very competitive economic system that constrained the global marketplace because nobody really wanted to trade with anybody else. In order to protect businesses in your own country that you want to exist, you have to put tariffs on foreign products so that your people are never tempted to buy from a foreign country. So you put big tariffs on other places so that your own people buy from your own companies. Very patriotic. France became more self-sufficient because of this. They relied on fewer imports from other places. They were more self-sufficient because of mercantilism. Louis did hurt the economy quite a bit, though. He kicked out the Huguenots. The Huguenots had really, really helped the economy of France. They worked very hard. They were merchants. And Louis XIV didn't want to deal with them having the power to be independent at all. The power to worship anything but the church that he was officially in charge of in France, the Catholic Church. And so Louis XIV kicked all the Huguenots out, and that was a big financial drain on France. Louis lived in incredible splendor in his royal palace, which is called Versailles. I have a book here that I'm going to show you some pictures of in a minute. Versailles, the Complete Visitor's Guide. Really cool, really gorgeous. If you ever get to Paris, Versailles is just 12 miles outside of the city. You've got to take a train to get there. It's about a half an hour to get there. And it's really, really gorgeous. You have to. If you get to Paris, you must see Versailles. Anyway, Versailles was originally just his grandfather's hunting lodge. But Louis wanted to get out of the city. He wanted to be less vulnerable to the whims of the peasants who lived in Paris. He wanted to get 12 miles outside of the city for his own protection. And so Louis XIV had Versailles turned from a hunting cottage into a massive, beautiful palace. He wanted it to be the greatest palace in Europe, and he definitely succeeded. Massive, massive place. And in order to control the nobles so that they didn't start rebellions in their own part of the country, Louis XIV forced them all to live with him at Versailles. He gave them no political power, he gave them no ability to make decisions, but he gave them a lot of alcohol, he gave them a lot of entertainment, He gave them a lot of opportunities to cheat on their wives with each other. So it was really a very, very fascinating setup. He forced the nobles to come live with him and completely deprived them of everything but entertainment so that they wouldn't focus on political power. He had decorated the palace with incredible art. Very, very expensive stuff, gold-plated things. He had the best painters and artists and architects and sculptors in all of Europe at this time. And he staged plays there that were being done by France's greatest ever playwright, probably as great as William Shakespeare, a man named Molière. And Molière's plays right behind Shakespeare maybe as the greatest of all time. Louis actually had some political problems with other countries. They started to realize that he was a danger to them, that allowing King Louis XIV to build France as a superpower was going to take away their ability to be independent and do independent things. So he invaded Belgium. Back then it was the Spanish Netherlands. Spain had taken control of the Netherlands. He invaded that territory. It was a minor success because the Dutch managed to fight back and keep control of some of it. He fought another war in 1572 against the Dutch, hoping that he would be able to completely conquer their territory. He didn't succeed, but again, he did take small amounts of additional territory. By this time, he decided he was going to start a bigger war. In 1680, the rest of Europe had decided at this point that he was just too big, too dangerous to ignore. So they all ganged up against him. When he started the next war, there was a massive alliance to stop him. They wanted to preserve what's known as the balance of power. The idea that if one power gets too big, if one country becomes a superpower, nobody else is going to be able to act independently. So you have to gang up to preserve the balance of power. In 1689, King Louis's grandson, In 1689, Louis's worst enemy, the ruler of the Netherlands, a man named William of Orange, also became the King of England at the same time and united England and the Netherlands and the Holy Roman Empire and Spain against Louis XIV. The Habsburgs, who ruled the Holy Roman Empire and Spain, both wanted to help out the Dutch because they hated France. Your next blank here is the War of Spanish Succession. The thing was that Spain's Habsburg king died in the year 1700 without any children. And his nearest living relative was actually Louis XIV's grandson. The rest of Europe was like, no, we're not going to let France inherit Spain. That would be too crazy a superpower to allow to exist. And so they fought a massive war to stop Louis XIV from 1701 to 1714. Eventually, both sides were exhausted, and they decided to let Louis XIV's grandson take the throne, but on the agreement that he would never, ever, ever unite the two countries. France and Spain would always be independent from each other and under separate rulers, even if they were in the same family. Also, France and Spain, if they were going to be allied in the King of France's family, had to give up a ton of their colonies, which is where England and the Holy Roman Empire get a lot of territory that they hadn't had before. England and the Habsburgs added to their territories, like England got a lot of territories in the Caribbean and in North America that had been French colonies. And Austria, which was the Holy Roman Empire, took a lot of territory in Italy that the French had controlled. And the Spanish Netherlands became the Austrian Netherlands at this time. Louis died in 1715, having made France the dominant country in Europe, the shining star of the continent. French language was dominant everywhere. French art, French style, even French furniture became the most fashionable furniture in Europe. But he died leaving France deeply, deeply in debt. And that would come due. The bill for Louis XIV's debt would come due under Louis XVI, his great-grandson, and it would cost the French monarchy their heads. Now, Versailles. I promised that I would show you some pictures of the royal palace of Versailles. First, I'm going to show you a picture of Louis XIV's royal chapel in Versailles. This is the king's private chapel where he has church services. 3 stories with a giant fresco on the ceiling. Just massive, and this is just for the king and his immediate family. Now, I'm going to show you a picture here of Louis XIV, the king who had this, turned into a royal palace instead of it just continuing to be his dad's hunting lodge. Here is Louis XIV. He looks a little bit girlish here, I know. The fashion was to wear tights and have very long hair. Very expensive clothing. This is Louis XIV. And I alluded to Louis XVI, the king who will eventually lose his head. That was him. Now, King Louis decided to have one great hallway where foreign visitors could come and be completely overawed, like all the ambassadors coming to visit France. And it's called the Hall of Mirrors. I've been in it a few times. It's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. The Hall of Mirrors. Mirrors were incredibly expensive back then, of course, and so this was a show of great wealth. Now, originally, this was just a hunting lodge, and here is King Henry IV in the black hat. Henry IV ruling and granting a bunch of people a knighthood. So there's Louis's grandfather, Henry IV. Now, I've shown you some pictures of the inside. I want to show you a picture of just how big Versailles is, a map of the entire estate. So here is the entire estate of Versailles, and down here is the entire huge royal palace. So you can tell from this that the gardens extend hugely. There are multiple palaces on the grounds, and even a hamlet over here, like a little French farming village just for fun. So, massive gardens, huge gardens at Versailles. And there are thousands, literally, thousands of water fountains. Here's an example of one of the big ones. Literally thousands of these water fountains all over the grounds at Versailles. Here's another one that is in the form of a waterfall in a grove. Just massive. I got one more for you because it's so beautifully golden, gold-plated. Right here. Oh, what the heck, I'll do you one more. So these gigantic waterfalls and water fountains built at the Palace of Versailles. There's multiple palaces on the grounds. Really incredible place. Go if you ever get the chance. Magnificent, simply absolutely magnificent. And all built by Louis XIV to be an absolute king. His nickname was the Sun King. Louis the Sun King, because everything under the sun was part of what he controlled. So, pretty arrogant guy, pretty grand, but maybe he was worth it. So, the next time we get together, we're going to talk about Central Europe, the Holy Roman Empire, and Prussia. See ya!